The popularity of the sea crane has been rapid in the fishing industry and follows the revolution in lifting gear used on trucks and utes ashore. Lower installation costs, more compact hydraulics, computerized operating controls, and lower power requirements have all meant that these cranes have become very popular and cost-effective in the fishing and aquaculture industries. The cranes are robust, require simple but regular maintenance, are suitable for the marine environment, and when used for low and repetitive loadings, have proven to be safe and efficient on the open decks of a fishing vessel. Safety rules developed for land-based cranes mounted on trucks and utes can be transferred directly to their waterborne cousins with additional safety precautions. One example is when a new crane is fitted on a vessel, the working load limits, or WLL, will be marked on a plate located near the base of a crane, and these figures will apply to land-based operations. When these figures exceed the stability limits specified in the vessel's stability book, the figures must be amended, or there is a very real risk of overloading and capsize. A naval architect will provide guidance on load limits and radius of operation of the jib in an approved stability book and take into consideration the following important operating differences. 1. A vessel that floats in water must have sufficient stability before a lifting operation begins. 2. A vessel in the water doesn't have the advantage of putting out pads and hydraulic legs to add more stability. 3. Bad weather, wind and waves means that the operator on a vessel faces more lifting challenges than a shore-based crane. 4. Fish farm operations are now venturing further from sheltered waters, which require larger and more complex vessels. 5. Operators may be limited in space on deck and will always be responsible for the safety of other members of the crew. 6. The skipper of a vessel fitted with a crane is required to understand information and operate safely using the guidelines of a simplified stability book. 7. The AMSA is the national regulator for domestic commercial vessels and requires each vessel to have a safety management system, or SMS, and where a crane is fitted, its safe operation must be included. Keeping a crane in good operating condition means regular maintenance because the marine environment can be harsh on components due to salt spray and sea water pooling in various parts of the mechanism. Daily and weekly maintenance schedules are required to ensure the crane is always fully operational and ready for use. Specific tasks will vary according to the crane type, but all will include a thorough check of deck mount bolts, plating and brackets, hydraulic oil levels, greasing points, and jib extension lubrication. If a crane is not operating correctly, stop it. Continued operation may cause serious damage requiring costly repairs or replacement of the whole crane. Report the problem to the maintenance manager immediately and tag out the operating controls. Much of the net weight lifting work on a fish farm can be done using a rotating drum known as a capstan. A capstan is a relatively quick and efficient way of raising and lowering small loads. A capstan may be mounted horizontally or vertically depending on where it is sited on board and the type of lift required. A capstan can be fitted to a crane and operate from its hydraulics or be a separate mechanism with its own independent means of power. Safe use of the capstan involves winding on the correct number of turns so the rope grips the drum but is also able to quickly release the load. The correct number of turns means the operator can increase friction between the rope and the drum to continue the lift in a controlled manner. The operator must have means to quickly cut the power to the capstan. This will normally be in the form of a red-coloured push button located to the right of the control station. Serious physical injury can result from poor work practices in the vicinity of a capstan. Operators must keep hands, wrists and clothing clear of the rotating drum and rope. No loose clothing should be worn, and beware of lanyards hanging from coats or overalls as these can become entangled. The job allocated for this vessel is to lift a 3-ton mooring block from the seabed. The crew are experienced and familiar with their equipment, but as is often said, familiarity breeds contempt, and this can apply to any risky operation such as the one about to be undertaken. Checks are carried out systematically so nothing is forgotten. 1. The pre-lift checklist is completed for all equipment used during the lift. 2. Correct PPE is worn by crew members. 3. A job safety analysis, or JSA, is carried out carefully using the company's guidelines for this category of lift. All crew members are involved in the risk assessment process. 4. The stability book guidelines are checked by the skipper to make sure the vessel will remain stable throughout the lifting operation. 5. A thorough inspection of the bilges is made to ensure there is no free surface effect. This is one of the cautionary notes in the stability book because water in the bilges reduces stability. 6. Crew members are given their tasks and required to confirm their understanding. The use of correct hand signals is an essential part for the safety of any lifting operation, and for this lift, an extra one is included. When the crane operator removes both hands from the crane controls and raises them in the air, this is the signal which allows a crew member to move from a safety zone to the exclusion zone to carry out a task. Having all moving parts of the lifting operation in sight of the crane operator and skipper at all times is one of the most important parts of reducing hazards associated with this lifting operation. When the concrete block is ready to be lifted on board, a specially designed lifting grapple fitted to the crane jib is manoeuvred into position and attached to the lifting point on the concrete block. The weight of the block is then transferred from the hauling winch to the crane. At no point is a crew member required to manually fix shackles, handle ropes, or chains under load or move from a safety zone. The crane lifts the block and slowly slews the load to the deck where it is landed. The crane operator removes his hands from the controls and raises them. The skipper can now move to the exclusion zone to carry out the final part of the lift. The job is completed safely, efficiently, and with a minimum of risk to crew members. Practical training and assessment requires that each participant is required to show competence in operating a vessel's deck-mounted crane, which requires skills to 1. Check all components used during the lifting operation, including slings and chains, shackles, and securing of pins. 2. Check that there is a clear slewing radius for the crane so that the crane jib does not contact any part of the vessel, as even a slight contact can damage the crane jib and have serious consequences for its continued safe use. 3. Check around the crane base and securing bolts looking for signs of corrosion, loose or sheared bolts, or cracked welds in plating. 4. Check hydraulic oil levels. This should be done when the crane is in the fully stowed position. 5. Correctly connect the load with the approved sling or chain suitable for the lifting task. 6. Check the controls are free and operating smoothly. 7. Position crew within safety zones so that the load can be kept in sight at all times. 8. To be aware that as soon as the load is lifted clear of the deck, the stability of the vessel changes because the load is acting at the end of the crane jib. 9. To be aware that the vessel's centre of gravity rises and stability is reduced, and that when the load is lifted off-centre, the vessel will list over toward that side. 10. To acknowledge that when the load moves further off the vessel's centre line, the operator must be aware of the operational limits of angle of heel and loss of freeboard. 11. To be aware that everyone involved in the use of the crane must be able to give and recognise the correct hand signals for slewing, luffing, and extending the crane jib so that it's possible to clearly direct the lift when the load cannot be seen by the crane operator. 12. To be able to check a lifting sling or chain for damage and correctly store this equipment ready for the next lifting operation. 13. To never throw a sling or chain on the deck or in an area where possible chemical contamination can occur. PPE, or personal protection equipment, is worn during all phases of the lifting operation, and these include safety footwear, overalls, no loose-fitting clothes, personal flotation vest or life jacket and helmet. Gloves and safety glasses may be needed during some lifting operations. The designer of a vessel is required to produce a stability book, not only to show that the vessel meets the stability criteria for craneage operation, but also as a guide in the use of the installed crane and how to maintain sufficient margins of safety during all steps of the lift. The stability book should include important notes for the skipper, such as 1. A weight is always considered to act at the end of the crane jib, irrespective of where the load actually is. So keep the end of the crane low to reduce the rise of the vessel's centre of gravity and loss of stability. 2. Slew the crane slowly and smoothly and keep a tagline on the load to prevent it swinging. 3. A weight lifted over the side of a vessel will reduce stability more rapidly than if the same weight were lifted over the bow or stern. 4. Remove a list before lifting. 5. Minimize sources of free surface like bilge water, slack tanks or water on deck. 6. Lifting a weight from the seabed can exceed the WLL of the crane if suction is involved. 7. Good seamanship is always involved in the handling of a vessel, and this includes when to use the crane, stop or suspend lifting operations. These are all decisions the skipper will make every day. Seek advice from a qualified naval architect when you need guidance in understanding a stability book for your vessel. It will always be beneficial for you as a skipper, owner or fish farm manager to sit down and go through the document so that the important parts are highlighted. It is your duty of care to make sure that those responsible for the safe operation of the vessel are well informed and understand the dangers associated with lifting weights and maintaining stability through each phase of the lifting. The naval architect is required under the NSCV and USL codes to provide a number of typical loading conditions for the vessel so that the skipper is able to quickly determine if the vessel meets one of them and will allow the lift to proceed. If the vessel is to operate outside the limits of one of the conditions of loading in the stability book, a naval architect will need to recalculate the new condition to make sure that it meets the stability standards.